It is Red River Rivalry week in Texas. We got the Longhorns, number 1 in the country, taking on the number 18 ranked Oklahoma Sooners. I'm going to break down everything from this game, give you my thoughts and opinions. Before I do that, make sure, if you're new to our channel, like this video, subscribe to the channel. All that support really helps us. Give us a comment below. Let us know what you think about who's going to win in this Red River Rivalry 2024 edition. Let's dive into it. We have the Longhorns, number 1 in the country, 5-0, taking on the number 18 Oklahoma Sooners. They come in 4-1. Oddly enough, this game has always been played at 11 a.m. Central Time, and it's always been a morning game, and for some reason this year, they're going to play this at 2:30, so they moved it back a little bit. Texas comes into the game, a 14.5-point favorite. Total on the game is 50.5, so a little bit of a low total for a college football game here on the lower end. Looking at this rivalry historically, Texas leads the all-time series, 63, 51, and 5 ties, although Oklahoma has won 7 of the last 10 meetings. Last time Texas came into this rivalry and was number 1 overall was back in 1984, and you know who won that game? Neither team. It was a tie, 15-15. 9 of the last 10 games between the two have also been determined by just 1 score or less, with the lone exception coming in 2022 when Texas dominated OU 49-0. Last year's Red River Rivalry was a treat, back-and-forth game. OU had a lead early. There were big plays back and forth all game. Texas had the ball late in a 27-all game, had a chance to maybe run the clock out and kick a field goal. Sark had some conservative play calls, to say the least, settled for a 47-yard Brent Auburn field goal to give Texas the lead with 1:17 to go, but OU came right down the field, scored in a minute 02. Nick Anderson, 3-yard touchdown catch from Dylan Gabriel with just 15 seconds to go. And the Sooners upset the Longhorns, although the Longhorns got the last laugh, making the college football playoff, and OU missed it after back-to-back losses middle of the year to Kansas and Oklahoma State. But looking at this year's matchup, both teams coming to this game off of a bye, so no hangover spot from a win or a letdown spot. Both teams had last week off. Texas currently has an 85% chance to win the game according to FPI, and that's no surprise considering the Horns come into this game as a more than a 2-touchdown favorite. Looking at the matchup, the top 2 storylines, or the top storyline for Texas at least, is the quarterback position, right? We have Quinn Ewers, who is coming off an oblique injury, was injured in the UTSA game, obviously. When he went down, Arch Manning comes into the game. He lights the world on fire that first game. 5 touchdowns in the game, 4 passing, 1 rushing. He comes back, starts the next game. Not as good of a start against Louisiana Monroe. Had 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. And then most recently against Mississippi State. I thought he was actually really good in Mississippi State. Had a couple of big drop passes by his receivers. One of those was Jonte Cook. Arch dropped a beautiful ball, maybe 50 yards in the air. Would have been a walk-in touchdown. So numbers are a little bit deceiving in that game, but even if you look at it just from the 3 games he played, he had 9 touchdowns in basically 9 quarters of action, just 2 picks, completed over 70% of his passes. His lowest QBR was 79.4, so he had at least roughly an 80 QBR higher every game. He also ran for 3 touchdowns, and he ran for over 100 yards if you factor out sacks, over 10 yards per carry. Definitely something that Arch brings to the table above Quinn is his mobility. Quinn can scramble at times and will use his legs, but Arch is definitely more athletic and can really turn those runs into big-time plays, explosive plays. And you look at it, right? On the other side, you have Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers led this team to a college football playoff berth last year, right? He led the Horns to a big win at Michigan, the defending national champions, albeit they're not great this year, but still a tough place to play early in the season. Leads him in there, dominates the game. He was great in the first half. Phenomenal in the first half, really. And he brings an experience factor that Arch doesn't have. Quinn's played in a lot of big games. He played at Bama last year, won that game. Played in a Big 12 championship last year, won that game. Played great in both of those starts. Obviously, this year against Michigan, already mentioned. But then you look also last year in this Oklahoma game, in this very rivalry, he got off to a really rocky start, threw 2 picks, I believe, on the first 2 possessions of the game. It got Texas in a big hole. He was much better in the second half, but I think overall he would have told you that wasn't his best game. Obviously, this is all for nothing to debate because Quinn Ewers is starting, assuming he's healthy, and we got the note today that he's probable to play. And so we're going to see Quinn Ewers under center or in the shotgun for the Horns come Saturday afternoon. And whether we see Quinn play the rest of the year as a starter, I guess it remains to be seen. But more than likely, it feels like if he is healthy, this is his job. I don't think that is a hot take whatsoever. As good as Arch looked, this is Quinn's team, barring injury. OU, on the other hand, has some quarterback problems of their own, but it's not the positive variety like Texas has. They had their beginning of the year starter bench, Jackson Arnold. He was all the rave coming in, had a really exciting, good bowl game last season. 5-star kid out of Denton, Texas, sophomore. Through his first 3 starts, he was completing 63% of his passes, threw 6 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions, but the offense really lacked explosiveness, and they were struggling in the pass game to throw the ball down the field. Less than 6 yards per pass, the Sooners were averaging through his first couple starts. And then they go into the Tennessee game, and they're at home. Tennessee's defense is very solid, for sure, but first real test for Jackson Arnold, and he was abysmal. Could not get a positive play, could not complete a forward pass is what it looked like, and he got pulled in that game, and he finished that game with a 1.3 QBR. Obviously didn't play in the second half, but in steps Michael Hawkins Jr., a 3-star redshirt freshman out of McKinney, Texas, in Frisco Emerson High School. He was the 85th ranked player in the state of Texas, not in the country, in the state of Texas, the 35th ranked quarterback. Like I said, a 3-star kid, and now he's all of a sudden replacing this, super hyped 5-star Jackson Arnold. The problem is that, from what I've seen, Hawkins, I believe, is actually maybe a worse passer than Arnold, and I don't think that's crazy to say. Either of them are great, but what Hawkins does give you is legs, right? He's explosive, more explosive than Arnold. He can run it, gives him some pop in the run game. He ran it 12 times for 74 yards when you factor out sacks in their last outing, including a 48-yard touchdown run in the first quarter. But overall, when you look at the two quarterback situations, it's obviously a big advantage for Texas, right? And that's a big part of, who's going to win this game. You have an experienced quarterback in Quinn Ewers. You have a guy who's played in big games. Yes, he wasn't great in the Red River Rivalry last year, but he's played in much bigger games than this and been successful. He's coming off that injury, assuming he doesn't start slow and have a rough start to the game, which I would be surprised to see. Huge advantage Texas. Even if Quinn goes down in the game, it's huge advantage Texas. Arch Manning is significantly better than either guy for Oklahoma, and I don't think that's even close, to be honest. Looking at this from a coaching perspective, I think it's a big advantage for Texas as well. You have Steve Sarkisian, who has really done an incredible job building a program at Texas. They won 4 more games in the prior year, each of his first 3 seasons. He did a heck of a job last year getting them to the college football playoff. Obviously lost this game to Venables last year, maybe with a little bit of conservative play calling being a factor there. But I think Sark overall is very highly regarded. I regard him very highly as a head coach and a culture builder and a developer of quarterbacks. He's done a heck of a job here. And I like Sark a lot. On the other hand, you have Brent Venables. And to be honest, I've been underwhelmed with him at Oklahoma. I thought he was a really, really good defensive coordinator when they first hired him. I really wasn't happy as a Texas fan, thinking, you know what? This is probably a pretty good hire, and I could see him doing some really good things here at Oklahoma, but it just hasn't quite panned out yet. At least not to the standard of Oklahoma fans in the past 2 decades. And while his defense has gotten much better under Venables, it's taken some time, and it's much better than it was under, say, Lincoln Riley, but that's not saying much because they were abysmal under Lincoln Riley. It's now to the point where they are a top 50-40 defense, but they're not a top 10 defense by any means. And I'm going to get into breaking down their defense here in a little bit, but to me, this just feels like a big advantage for Texas. I don't think it's a massive advantage. I don't think Brent Venables is a bad coach, but I didn't understand giving him that big extension this offseason. That was really odd to me. I thought he had a little bit more to prove, and I think that's going to be more of what the feeling is at the end of this year, at least from Sooner fans. But you guys, Sooner fans, let me know in the comments below. Do you like Venables? Am I wrong? Do you think he's a good coach? Is he the right fit for OU? I think he's coming from a good spot in Clemson, obviously, and had a lot of success there as a DC, but I'm not sure he's the right guy for this one going forward. And we'll move on now to the actual matchup, but I did want to talk about quarterback coach And I think advantage Texas on both of those fronts is partially why we're seeing some of this line, but also just the matchup here in general. Just from a talent perspective, it's a big advantage for Texas. And when we look at the matchup, Texas's only real data point that we can look at and analyze is the Michigan game, because the Horns haven't played a living, breathing soul, if we're being honest, besides the Wolverines. Now, Michigan, I don't think is great. They lost to Washington on the road last week. They obviously have quarterback concerns of their own over there in Ann Arbor. But that's a tough place to play, let alone your second game of the season, and you have some new transfers coming in, and you really don't know 100% what your team is yet, and they handled it about as well as you could have, especially offensively. Ewers was phenomenal in that game. The offense in general was phenomenal in that game. The Horns scored on 4 of their first 5 drives, with the lone drive in which they didn't score resulted in a missed field goal. So they reached the 25-yard line of Michigan or better in each of their first 5 drives, and scored 24 points in the first half. So 0 punts in the first half. And then in the second half, they punted on the first drive, and then second drive went 6 plays, 75 yards, scored a touchdown, made it 31-6. And Texas tends to do this when they get up under Sark, which is lean on the run game, shorten the game, and they're not trying to run up the score by a million, at least not against a good team if they believe that team could come back on them. They want to shorten the game at that point, knowing that they've got an advantage, right? And so they were not pushing the ball downfield and throwing it all over the yard like they were early in the game. On the other side, though, the defense looked really good against Michigan as well, right? Michigan scored on just 1 of their first 5 drives against Texas in that first half, and it was a field goal. And that long drive that they had, the reason that it was even into Texas territory was a trick play, right? Like a flea flicker type deal. So it wasn't like Michigan really moved the ball at all in the first half. The second half was not really any different. They had 3 points the entirety of the second half until the very end of the game, when Texas had some backups in the game and Michigan scored a touchdown on their final drive. Final score was 31-12. So looking at the lone data point, again, I'm not saying that this shows that Texas is incredibly far and away the best team in the country. I'm not saying that, but it does say the only real data point we have, they looked really good. And they went into a tough environment and won. And this is going to be a really electric environment, but it's not as tough of an environment as going on the road to a place like Ann Arbor in the Big House. But my one concern for Texas is that based on watching each of their games so far, it comes from the Mississippi State game. You look at that final score, 35-13, Texas wins the game by 22. It's not like it was really close in the fourth quarter whatsoever. Texas outgained Mississippi State by 228 yards. They threw it for almost 11 yards per pass, ran it for almost 6 yards, over 6 yards per rush. But my concern wasn't with the offense, it was with the defense. The offense punted twice the entire game. I know, it's weird because when you looked at the score late in the fourth quarter, it was 14-6, and it felt like, what's wrong with the offense? But when you dig into it, right, Texas fumbled twice. They had a turnover on downs, and on that turnover on downs, there was a dropped touchdown that I mentioned earlier that should have been an easy touchdown drive. They were really stopped on 2 possessions up until really the entirety of the game. But 2 fumbles, the turnover on downs, it ended up not being a great offensive performance when you look at it. But on the defensive perspective, similarly to kind of the game, when you look at the metrics, okay, Mississippi State had about 6.1 yards per pass and just 3 yards per rush. But my concern is that Texas forced just 1 3-and-out the entirety of the game. Just 1. And what that meant and what that allowed Mississippi State to do was extend drives and shorten the game. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to muddy it up, make it an ugly game, make it a low amount of possession game where that's the only way they have a shot, because they're obviously the much inferior team. They know that, right? If they try to sling it around the yard and, play fast tempo and all that, not going to work to their benefit, right? Most teams won't be able to do that versus Texas. My concern is that the game plan for them seemed to be what I just mentioned: slow, methodical, get a first down, sit on the ball, hold time of possession. My concern is that they were able to do that for 3 quarters, essentially, right? They dominated time of possession, 35-25, right? Had the ball for 10 more minutes than Texas. offensively, despite not being incredibly efficient rushing the ball, they had 19 or 20 first downs in the game. They extended drives, especially when Texas kept having miscues, right? Like they had the fumble and then they had the drop touchdown, and all of a sudden you look up, it's still 14-6 in the third quarter or 14-3, and Mississippi State's driving and converting every third down and short. And so that's my one concern here is that, if Mississippi State, who scored 17 points at home to Toledo, was able to do that against your defense, I'm a bit concerned. Like Oklahoma may be able to do the same type of deal and shorten the game. And then you get into a game in the fourth quarter where it's one score in a rivalry game and anything can happen. And that's my one concern here with Texas's defense. But from metrically, it doesn't look like Oklahoma is going to have much of a shot here. And we look at the other side of the ball and talking about the Oklahoma offense, Oklahoma in general, right? Oklahoma offense, according to Pro Football Focus, they are bottom 20 among all Power 5 schools in passing grade, pass block win rate or pass block grade, and receiving grade. Bottom 20 of all Power 5 teams in the country, right? So their pass game is non-existent. It's been horrible. They have yet to throw for over 200 yards in a single game for either quarterback combined, right? They have, they're averaging under 6 yards per pass as a team on the year. I believe Hawkins, in his first career start against Auburn last week, threw for 161 yards on 15 passes. Of his 15 passes, 7 of those passes were screens. He literally completed 3 balls beyond the line of scrimmage and only threw 8 passes beyond the line of scrimmage. That's pretty wild when you think about that, right? And it's even more wild when you think about the fact that OU was down basically that entire game, and yet they did not throw the ball much. They didn't push it downfield, and it's not like they were hiding something for this Texas game, right? They've already lost to Tennessee. That was a road SEC game. They lose that game and have 2 losses and have Texas on deck. All of a sudden, this season could be a disaster for Oklahoma, and they could not move the ball. There was nothing they could do, right? They had one 48-yard run from Hawkins early in the game and a pick 6 late. That's it, right? I mean, they had I think they had one explosive pass in the game that went for 60 yards. You factor that out, they threw for 100 yards on the other 14 passes. It's just not good. They don't move the ball well. And then when you look at Texas's defense, where have they been elite? It's been against the pass, right? They are actually number 2 in the country in pass yards per game allowed. And I will say they have not played an offense with a pulse. They have not played an offense that can move the ball. UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, Mississippi State, in Michigan, haven't played anybody. But they're also number 1, according to Pro Football Focus, in coverage grade. So it's not like guys are running wide open and they're playing bad quarterbacks who are missing throws, or they're playing bad wide receivers who are dropping balls. They're covering very, very effectively. They're just not playing any good pass defenses, and they're playing well, and so nobody's moving the ball against them through the air. So to me, I just don't see how OU has any type of success through the air here. And if you make Oklahoma one-dimensional, which is what they already really are, how does Oklahoma find success offensively? And it's just hard for me to see it here. I just don't find much of a path to success. Like I said, I think the only thing that concerned me was shortening the game, running the ball, converting a lot of third downs, and making it a low possession game where it's close late and anything can happen. That's OU's strategy here. It has to be. And it's got to be get a lead early, right? If Texas jumps on OU, this game is going to be over, and Texas is going to cover the spread of over 2 touchdowns quite easily. The other thing OU has to hope for is Quinn Ewers is rusty, right? We know he's I would say 95% to start this game. And so if Ewers comes out rusty, or if he comes out like he did, last year in the Oklahoma game where he threw 2 picks on his first 2 possessions and Oklahoma can get a lead, I'm not saying they'll win the game, but that's their path to success. Because if they get into a situation where it's Texas 14-0 or 21-0 and they're forced to throw the ball, good luck. They are not going to come back. They're not going to have success. This isn't like 3 years ago, 4 years ago when Spencer Rattler's playing terrible and you throw Caleb Williams in. They don't have a Caleb Williams. They don't have anybody to throw in there who can throw the ball. Okay, so if Texas jumps on them early, it's going to be tough. Problem is, I don't see Oklahoma being able to score early. I think that Texas will jump on them early. And so you look at the other side of the ball then, and you think, what about the OU defense? Can they do enough to slow down Texas's offense to where, if they are able to get up early on Texas and they are able to have, say, a 14-0 or a 7-0 or 10-0 lead, can the defense do enough to get stops and keep it low scoring? And when you look at it from a pure points per game perspective, Oklahoma's looked really good, right? They've given up 25 or less in every game, including the game they lost to Tennessee. Just 16 points per game allowed in the season. So, basic counting stats look pretty good. And then you dive into the numbers and you start digging. And you see that that's a little bit fraudulent. Why? Well, let's start with number one. Two of the teams they played, Temple and Houston. Those are two of the worst offenses in the entire FBS. They're 121st and 122nd, respectively, in offensive efficiency. One of those teams, Houston, who is 122nd in offensive efficiency, put up 318 yards, total yards on OU's defense, and outgained them by 80 yards. There have been multiple games this year where Houston has been shut out, right? They don't score at all. And it wasn't until this past game against TCU where they made a quarterback change where they looked like they had any life offensively. And if we're being honest, if you were watching that game, Houston damn near won it. They probably should have won the game. I mean, like I said, outgained them by 80 yards. They threw for over 9 yards per pass against that defense. And that's the consistent thing that I saw looking across the metrics. EPA per pass allowed. Success rate on passing downs, or on success rate on dropbacks. Overall yards per pass, not good against subpar, worse than subpar offenses, right? Tulane is okay. They've looked better since then. That game was 24-19 in the fourth quarter, right? Tennessee's offense isn't even top 50 this year. They have really struggled the last couple of weeks. They had 350 total yards and 10 yards per pass. And they let off their foot late, if we're being honest, right? They were up big. I think it was like 22-3 and let their foot off the gas and made that. They probably could have put up closer to 500 yards of total offense if Heupel really wanted to do that to the team he played for. But the most concerning data point, if none of that is a factor to you, is think about the last week game against Auburn. And this is an Auburn offense who has made 3 quarterback changes this year, right? And they've gone back to Peyton Thorne now, who in the Cal game threw 4 interceptions at home. He's almost unplayable. The problem is the guy behind him, Hank Brown, is pretty much unplayable as well. Excuse me. Auburn in that game with that quarterback had nearly 500 total yards of offense against that Oklahoma defense, right? Peyton Thorne, who is awful, threw for 338 yards against the Sooner defense. And it's not like Auburn was trailing the whole game and having to throw a bunch. They were up most of the game. They just threw it all over the yard. And that seems to be a commonality when you look at these games. Oklahoma secondary isn't great, right? They've been really good against the run, against subpar offenses, but even against subpar passing games, they have been extremely poor, right? Auburn moved the ball up and down the field against the Sooners. They had 150 yards on the ground, 338 yards through the air, nearly 500 yards of total offense, right? As I said, over 9 yards per pass. And if that offense was able to do that to the Sooners defense, what's this Texas offense going to do? Right? What's Isaiah Bond going to do? How many yards is Quinn going to throw for on this secondary? I mean, again, you just look at every aspect of this game, and I get it. It's been a wacky year in college football, and absolutely Oklahoma could win this game. Things happen. Weird things happen. Quinn could throw a couple picks early. The defense could be shell-shocked from being down, and all of a sudden the offense for OU gets in a rhythm. They're able to run the ball. You never know, right? Cal was up 25 on Miami the other night. And then Miami comes back. We had Tennessee go down, blowing a 13-3 lead. Might have been 13-0 lead at Arkansas, right? Obviously, we saw Alabama lose to Vanderbilt. It's been a wacky year in college football. Anything could happen. But if you want to look at this from a logical perspective, and you want to look at it from the perspective of who do you think will actually win the game, where are the matchups, where are the advantages, Texas is favored in every category, every single category, right? They are the better team. They're a better coach. They have the better quarterback, right? They also have the advantage of they lost this game last year, right? It's not like they're going to come into this game, oh, we're the number 1 team in the country playing against Oklahoma who's down this year. No, they lost this game. This game means a lot. They do not want to lose this game, right? This is a huge game for their season. This game and Georgia are the 2 best teams they play all year, right? If they win those 2 games, you can basically pencil them into the SEC championship game and the college football playoff. So This is a massive step towards those goals. They're not going to take OU lightly. They're the better team, and they've got the better quarterback and the better coach. The Longhorns will jump on them early. I see a 21-0 start. I truly don't see how Oklahoma scores here. And I think the Longhorns run away with this one. I'm going to project the score. I believe Texas wins at 45-17, and the Horns will go into next week's matchup with the Georgia Bulldogs as the number 1 overall team in the country. And we'll see how that matchup goes out. Going to be a huge one next week against the Bulldogs. But that's all I got for this breakdown of Texas OU. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like this content, leave us a comment below. Let me know. Am I wrong? Am I being a Texas homer? Is OU have a legitimate shot here to win? If not, tell me below. If you're a Texas fan, what do you think? Any comment helps. All the engagement helps the algorithm and helps push our content to other people. And if you are not subscribed, it takes 2 seconds. It really helps us out. We're trying to get up to 5,000 subscribers this year. That's our goal. So thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Catch you next time.